Welcome to Taking the Tradition On, and Happy New Year. Taking the Tradition On is a series of conversations about oral storytelling with exceptional people. We are currently on series 4, Words in the Work. So it's all about applied storytelling, using storytelling in different spheres and different places. All previous 3 episodes of Taking the Tradition On are available on the YouTube site, the Taking the Tradition On YouTube channel. And if you do like them, if you enjoy Taking the Tradition On, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. As always, I would like to thank my fantastic patrons who help make this possible. Taking the Tradition On is free. It always will be free. But the patrons help me find the time to do it. And I have a new patron. I get very excited when I have a new patron. I have a brand new patron today. So welcome, Rebecca. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the gang. We're really delighted to have you on board. And you can join Rebecca and all my other patrons at patreon.com/Amy Douglas. So today we have a marvellous guest, Sef Townsend, and we're going to be looking at the role of storytelling and working with asylum seekers and refugees, and to promote peace and reconciliation. Sef Townsend has been working as a storyteller for more than 3 decades in all kinds of situations all over the world. He's based in London, and with collaborator Anne Johnson, he's co-authored 2 books, London Folktales for Children and London's River Folktales for Children, with a 3rd book on the way. He might tell us what the name of that one is very soon. And Sef works as a storyteller in all sorts of situations. He works with museums, churches, mosques, synagogues. He works in town squares and theatres, in schools and colleges. But he does have particular area of expertise in working with asylum seekers and refugees, in interfaith projects, and in working on long-term projects for peace and reconciliation. And that is what we are going to be focusing on today in Words in the Work. So please give a massive whoop 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 on the chat and go mad for the marvellous powerhouse that is Sef Townsend. Welcome, Sef.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's just a delight to have you here today, Sef. Welcome.
It's a delight to be here. And before we start, if I can just say one thing, in dedication of someone who died on New Year's Eve, and her name was Nest Gifford, and she was absolutely devoted to people getting on with each other. And she worked in interfaith situation, and were it not for the present situation, she might well not have died. She got a chest infection and she died from it. And I mean, that's very timely that it's happening to us here in this country, but it's also happening to the people who are trying to get into this country, escaping strife and conflict and war. I hope you don't mind, but I just have to sort of, as it were, dedicate this hour to her, to Nest, because she was so special.
Well, I think that's really fitting, a fitting tribute, and it seems like a really fitting topic actually for this time of year. It's the new year, it's a new start, but it's a traditional time for reflection, and to look at what has been going on, and to look at the past year, and to set our goals, and to set our resolutions for the new year. And I think that we might all have a few of those by the end of this hour, possibly. And you might give us a couple of pointers of things that we all can, should, could be doing, and saying, and just being maybe a little bit present and a bit more mindful. And obviously, I mean, the area that you work in, you talk about people who are sort of trying to escape really awful situations, and whether that's monetary, maybe whether it's physical danger or mental danger. I think it always takes a huge amount for someone to want to leave their home and their country and their birthplace and the place that they
wants to. People don't want to.
No, they don't. And I think, and it's I think that view of people coming here to take all of our stuff, it's like people don't want to move, and there is always a reason. And it just seems such a hugely worthwhile work that you do, but also full of all kinds of pitfalls and trips for the unwary when you're working with really vulnerable people. So how did you start? How did you start working with vulnerable people? And did you just sort of blunder in with no experience, or were you given any training? And was there one particular moment that just set everything off, or was it just an accident?
I wasn't given any training on this particular style of applied work. You know, my work as a storyteller started actually when I was working with, once again, immigrant children, not refugees, but immigrant children in the East End of London. And I was trying to help them to learn English, and learning English from scratch. They just got off the plane from Bangladesh, most of them. It's very difficult to engage. And after the first week of my job, I thought, oh, I can't do this. This was the Friday. And I thought, you know, if I'm going to come in on Monday, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started telling a story. Now, they couldn't understand the words, but I made sure that I do a picture. I made a picture, and I somehow asked them, your language, what this? And they would say, this is gar, oh, house. Oh, this is tree, this is woman, this is donkey. And then I'd tell a story with 5 words, and they wouldn't understand the story. But on Monday, when I went in, the story. And by the end of that week, the teachers were saying, what are you doing with those kids? And I thought, oh my God, they've found out that I'm wasting my time telling stories. And I said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we've never had children who've come in the second week, who've come up to us and say, what's this, what's that, what's that, what's that, asking their friends. And the interesting thing about stories is if you've got the bare bones, say all the nouns, the emotions very often can be conveyed in other ways. And the rhythm of the words and the songs that I would sing. And that's how I became a storyteller so many years ago. But interesting, once more, it was with immigrant children. But as for working with vulnerable people who are fleeing their country, well, there's something about me. I am descended, I'm of mixed heritage, because on my father's side, they're very much yeoman farmers from Yorkshire. But on my mother's side, well, where do we start? There are people who fled conflict, there are people who immigrated, there are people who moved across continents, and there's something about me that whenever I'm in another country, I try immediately to find the most important words, you know, where is, how, thank you, hello, blah, 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 blah. And I try to just play it cool and go quiet and just observe. You can't observe if you're dressed in clothes that they're not wearing. Okay, my clothes are always going to be different to theirs, but I try to put things on that aren't flashy, that, you know, I'll just sit in a corner and they won't notice me. I think it's a deep desire to fit in, to not be seen as different, as other. And I think that thing about coming from that background where you want to fit in, it makes me feel for other people who are trying to do that. And I think it all comes from there, from feeling that I've had some experience on a lesser level than what they are having at the moment when they first arrive in a country which declares itself as a country of a hostile environment. It's a hostile country. The people are hostile. The media is hostile. We're telling lies about numbers. Okay, 45,000 refugees have crossed the channel in the last year, but there probably wouldn't be as many crossing the channel if they had a legal way to get in. I don't want to stand on a soapbox, but all I'm saying is, people have a hard time when they get here, and people do not want to leave their homes. Why would you cross a stormy sea if you weren't desperate? And why are they desperate? Oh, they could come into any country on the route. Yeah, you've got a brother here, you've got a mother here, you've got an aunt here. Of course, you want to connect. So I don't know if that's a long story to answer your question, But I think it's sympathy with people who are hounded, people who are chased, and people who are given the cold shoulder when they come for sanctuary. Sounds a bit preachy.
No, and it sounds very true, and it's interesting what you were saying about using story to recognize words as well, because you know, when I was sort of thinking about things that I wanted to talk to you about and ask you about, I was thinking, really, storytelling is such a bizarre art form in lots of ways. You're going into a room where people talk lots of different languages, and you might be in a room where nobody talks the same language as each other. And the one art form that you decide to go in there with is language based.
Actually, yes, but that's a big question. Yeah, it is language based, isn't it? Yes. That is difficult. It's tricky. So what you do, it depends on what context you're in. If I'm working with asylum detention, not a very nice environment, I have to say. I've worked in something which calls itself an immigration removal center. And as you go in there, you see the razor wire, you see the double gates, the safe gates. You go in one gate, it's closed. You go in the other gate, it's closed. No way, no time is there one gate open where everyone can get in and out. There's always another. And the first day I worked in this particular immigration removal center, I went in to see the head of the center. And behind him, he's sitting here, and behind him, there's a big slogan, almost like one of those communist slogans from the Soviet Union. And it says, "This is not a prison." And you think, why on earth do you even need to put that there? Because it is a prison. People are incarcerated. They can't get out. Yeah, so it's a hostile environment. You go into a situation. Let me talk first about asylum detention. People can be in there for 2 hours, usually there for 2 months. They can be there for 2 years. Several times during that time, they can be taken out and they don't know what's happening. They can be put on a plane. They can be taken out of my sessions and we'll never see them again. They can be sent back to Afghanistan. And in the session, you've seen this particular person dancing and twirling and twirling and twirling. And he's doing it in a very erotic, evocative way. And you know that he's been one of the boys that the Taliban have used as a sex slave and as a dancer. And now he's the one who's going to be sent back to Afghanistan. What's going to happen to him? So you're going into this situation where people do not actually necessarily want you. There's a long story about this, but where do you start? Where do you start with people who, for example, you might go into 1 week, you go into a little back room and there's 2 people there. The next week, you're sent into their TV room, very big TV screen, and the guards come in, they say, "Right, you're having storytelling now." You think, "Oh, that's a great start, isn't it? You know, you're having storytelling now, shut up, turn the TV off." And of course, they're sitting there like this and thinking, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And it can be very difficult. You
So
might.
what do you do? How?
Well, I mean,
how do you get yourself into that situation? And I'm very glad that the people like you doing it. But what do you do? How can you make life can you make life any better for those people?
Little projects funded by small charities, the charities who are against penal reform and various charities, they want to do something to help. You realize actually you're helping the asylum detention center, because they always say, the guards say, when you come in, they're always really easy to handle after a couple of days after you've been here. And you think, what am I doing? Am I just making it easier for you? But no, I'm actually making, for a moment, they're helping their lives to feel that there's some hope. So many questions here. What do you do? How do you get into it? If I just go in and we don't know yet, there's not been a room found. So I'm permitted to walk around the areas where they are. They might be in a cell, but the doors are always open when you go in. There are bunk beds, maybe two bunks in each room. People are sitting there. People are not doing anything. Somebody might be in a computer room trying to send a message to somebody if they're permitted. So you go in and you have to make a bit of a noise, and you have to go in, and maybe I'll walk in and I just sing a song, and people are going like, who is this crazy man? Or you go in, you say to somebody who looks a particular, you think this person has a particular background. And so very often, for so many nationalities, you can just say, Salam alaikum, which is a general greeting over, about 50 countries. They might respond. And then when you get a warm face, you say, well, which country are you from? And they say, I'm from Bangladesh. And then you say, khubala, or you say something in their language. And then they see somebody from Iran and you're greeting them in the very few words that you know. But what you're doing is trying to let them know that you're on their side. I might have a drum, I might have a darbuka, I might be playing something interesting that they can probably play better. And at that point, I might hand over the darbuka to them. Somebody's playing and they're outdoing me because they're so brilliant at it. Already you've got people engaged. That's in the corridor walkthrough. But if they're all in the TV room and you get there and the guards come in and say, you're having storytelling now, and they're looking at you, the TV's been switched off, which they've been looking at a favorite Pakistani film, which they probably won't get to see again. What do you do? So maybe I will try to identify somebody I've seen before. You never know who's going to be in a session. You never know who's going to be there from 1 week to the next. People are deported, they're returned. People are even let out onto the streets free. And then they're rounded up again and brought in 2 months later. You think, that, where have you been? It's a weird system. So I might play a drum, sing a song, and they might go, this is for kids. This is for kids. I don't want this. I don't want this. I mean, there was one particular moment when I went in with a colleague of mine, Gauri Raja, who, Heather in Scotland, you might know her. She's based in Scotland now. And we worked together in one centre for 3 years. And there were 4 really surly, unhelpful people who were fed up. They were fed up of having some privileged person coming into their incarcerated space, trying to be, hi. And then you have to say, well, it doesn't have to be for kids. I mean, you're struggling with language at this point, but you can get through. And then you think they need another type of story. And so a story that you might never normally tell is the story you need at this point. And so you could tell something about people being incarcerated, people being imprisoned. But like all the stories that you use, they're stories that are discrete and separate and not dealing with their reality. But for example, the famous story of the bird in the golden cage and the merchant who has the bird, and the bird who is given everything golden, a golden cage and a little swing that's got diamonds on it. And the merchant's going away, you know the story. And the merchant said, what can I bring you? What can I bring you? What can I bring you? And the bird says, I don't want anything. But when you go, you might see my family. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the bird tricks the merchant to find his family. He goes, finds the family and says, oh, I think I know a bird like you back home. The bird, who's probably the wife or the brother or the sister or the mother of the bird who's in the cage, drops dead to the floor. You know the story. Merchant comes back, doesn't know what to say to the bird. And the bird says, what was going on? What was going on? Well, I'm sorry, but I told your relative, and your relative just fell off the tree and died. At which point the bird in the cage falls off the perch, dies. I mean, I'm talking to storytellers here. You probably know this story. He picks up the bird. I'll bury you. I'll bury you. I'll bury you. He takes the bird and he just turns around to get his spade and he hears, and the bird rises into the sky and goes around him 3 times and flies off back there. because there's been this message, secret message. Now, refugees, asylum seekers know about secret messages, but they also know you are witnessing, you are acknowledging, you are saying to them, yes, in a very separated way. And then they say, that's a story. And then you've built a rapport with those 4 people. So the next time you go in, you hope that those 4 people will be there, because you keep having to build rapport every time. You might have to use a completely different technique, but I mean, that's an example of, they're not all twee little stories. They can be stories with very good resolutions, where someone suffered and someone has come out of that suffering, like the traditional story structure of character, problem, maybe a helper, some dream, some memory, some little token, difficult situation, try again. And the coming out of it, that thing of coming out can be very, very helpful to refugees, to asylum detainees, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to go the hard way.
Oh, lots of people loving that story, Seth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of, but yeah, Norman sort of saying it's a really powerful story in his life. Shane was telling it last night to his partner, and Simone's going, I haven't heard it before, but it is a powerful story, I think, for everybody.
It's a powerful story, and sometimes people think, oh, you can't tell them that. You can't touch on their reality. In a way, you can't directly ask people about their experience. Working with refugee women, I've worked a lot with women, it's curious, and very often Muslim women. So very often I'm telling a story, or I mean, after months and months of trying to set it up, because the main thing about working with refugees is actually getting a group of refugees to work together. There might already be a group where people are trying to help and they invite you in. But you come to the point where you might actually get to tell. And you're working with language, you're working once again with words that they don't understand. The simple thing of drawing, not having a beautiful picture, stick figures, words underneath in their language if they can write, sometimes they can't write. So they are already contributing. No, that word in my language is this. So people are trying to help each other to understand. You might get a 3-way translation from Farsi to Urdu to English to Bengali and back again. And there's some recognition. But sometimes they don't need to actually understand the story, because you can experience the emotion, the quality, the feeling in a story. And sometimes people just sit there and you know they're not understanding you, and they're sort of smiling and they're going with the rhythm. It might come to the point where they've all understood that story, and they will say to you, say to me, that's the first time I've been heard. And actually, I'm the one who's doing the talking. They're recognizing themselves through the story, not through me, through the story. I think the whole thing about working with refugees is never to confront them about their personal tale. But there might be the time when 3, 4, 5 sessions later, somebody says, we want to tell that story that you told. And maybe somebody will tell it in Somali, someone will translate, other people will still not understand it. So there's often a lot of chatter when you're telling a story, because there's a lot of translation going on. And there's a woman there who's telling a story about another woman who's had a really hard time and something really bad happens to her. And then it stops, because the storyteller, she choked. And everyone knows that this is fine, because without exposing her story, without revealing anything about herself, she's touched on a moment that everybody recognizes. At least they recognize her feeling at that point. And tears are wiped away because there's some sort of healing going on, because something is being expressed in a way that they cannot express it otherwise. And they're not even telling in a language that that lady down there will understand, but she gets it completely. And I think that's one of the main things when you think, wow, it's working. It's not working because of me, it's just working because of this story and of having the temerity to even dare to try. Because look, I'm a privileged man, a man working with Muslim women. I just got a photo the other day sent from a lovely woman in Burton-on-Trent. I worked 10 years ago, and she sent me this photo of these. There were 5 Afghan women and a Pakistani woman. The Pakistani woman has gone back to Pakistan and is doing a PhD. She was deported. I know so many people who have been deported who the country could use, you know. And 10 years later, she's sending it to me and she's saying, I came across this and I remember all these things and these women. She told me about each of the women's stories, how many children they got, how they met their husband, how somebody's aunt had died. And when it comes back to you 10 years later, it's really nice, you know.
That just sounds amazing. And I think it is that thing of the right person, the right story at the right time can just make a huge difference. And
But you can get it wrong.
well, that was going to be the next question.
I've often got it wrong. But the only way of dealing with getting it wrong is to acknowledge that you get it wrong. Like any storytelling, you can never pretend that you haven't forgotten. I can't. I have to say I've forgotten what happens next. And then it comes back. Some people do it differently. But you have to acknowledge when you've said something, done something wrong. Often when I'm working, people might be drawing or painting or doodling. I don't mind at all. And I encourage that. I can take, depending on the situation, in refugee groups, there's paper, there's pens and things like that. And I get people to try and mark on the paper something about the story. Sometimes they just draw the whole story, or they might just draw one picture. And I don't know where I started with that. Oh yeah, so I'm forgetting. Yeah, oh yes, yeah. So I was telling this story to a lot of people who were from Eritrea. And there were people from Sudan, and people from Somalia, and people from Iran, and people from China, and people from Nigeria. So we've got a lot of languages going on here. And I almost thought, I mean, even the Nigerians, they were Muslim. I thought, I'm dealing with a Muslim group here. So I put in a lot of Muslim-friendly, people love it when you acknowledge their culture, their religion, whatever. I put a lot of things that connected with Islam. And everyone did some pictures and they wanted to tell the story. And this group of Eritrean young men, on their pictures, all over the pictures, there were crucifixes, there were crosses. I thought, I'd assumed they were Muslim. And of course, Eritrea, which I learned since, is almost 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. And I'd really got it wrong by being over friendly, over trying to, sort of egg the pudding. I got it wrong, And I acknowledged it. I'd say, I'm sorry. And then next week, we corrected it somehow.
So you've got so much experience in this and you didn't get any formal training. I don't know how you managed to fund these projects, but are you now starting to ask and to find ways to teach other people, to bring other people into projects and apprentice them?
Well, I don't mind, and I have done it with people shadowing or coming along, some of whom don't want to be storytellers, but some who want to work in the sector or want to who want to somehow, I mean, I've done a lot in Greece with people who want to work with refugees, because on Lesbos and Mykonos and these islands where there are tent cities, storytelling seems to be a thing that people in Greece are wanting to do. So I did a project with people who wanted to be storytellers, people who were storytellers but hadn't done anything with refugees. And they want to know what sort of stories, what can you do, how can you do. You don't tell them what sort of stories. You talk about, I was talking about reaching out and trying to find and trying to, I think in a way, the most important thing for any storyteller is to go in humble and to go in with less experience than the people you're working with. You might have some stories, but they've got stories. I mean, a lot of refugees come from oral cultures. And if you acknowledge that they might know some of these stories better than you do, this is one of the main things I try to get over. You're in a room with how many people? They've probably got far more to contribute than you have. How do you tap in to that? So that's the work in Greece. Here, I've had people shadowing, coming along, trying to tell a story. I don't, because the projects, I mean, I haven't done any refugee work all of this year, but something's coming up in Derbyshire, which Naomi Wiles is trying to organise, with unaccompanied asylum seekers. And that's just, I mean, so many asylum seekers, they come, I know one young Afghan man, he's a man now, he's got a family. He came at the age of 12, he walked from Afghanistan. He was put into prison in Iran, he got out of prison. He walked over the border, he was shot at, he went back into Iran at the age of 12. He got through Turkey again, he got into Bulgaria, he was thrown off a train in Bulgaria. He'd had such a terrible time. When he got to Calais and across to Dover, nobody believed, well, he looked really bedraggled. He was now 13. But you have to be under 18 to be an unaccompanied asylum seeker. They said he was 19. He was 13. So often they don't believe you. And I don't know where I started this, but it was about mentoring and getting people.
This project with Naomi.
Oh yes, yes, and that was all about unaccompanied asylum seekers. So I imagine they will all be under 18, but the really difficult thing in our system is the moment you're 18, you can be deported. So you came here at 13. You've been here for 5 years. I just can't not say how aggressive and hostile our situation is. They're almost rubbing their hands together, thinking, "Oh, he's going to be 18 next week. We can get rid of him." So there might be issues like that when I work with Naomi. We're trying to get something going in Derbyshire, which is regular every week. I'll go up from London to Derbyshire, but and I will be working with people who will be learning from me. So I will be mentoring to a certain extent. But I can only do it when other people set up the project, because I work in schools. I'm a professional storyteller. I have to earn my money. And you can't always earn your money from working with refugees and asylum seekers unless there are charities who are funding what you are doing, or people like Naomi.
Well, particularly when you live in London, yeah, I mean, it's a struggle to make a living as a professional storyteller. I think anybody who's tried it will know.
I sometimes wonder if it's harder working in London than elsewhere. I don't know. We all have our problems, don't we? Of our thing.
Well, I think it's fine if you're going to be working in Derbyshire. It's just a cost of living, isn't it? But anyway,
I've done a lot with Naomi. I worked in in Burton-on-Trent with her, did long projects there with refugees.
She
That's
is an amazing woman who gets a lot going, gets a lot of amazing, worthwhile work done. But I'm going to hurry you on because we might come back to this, and there's certainly a couple of things that I want to ask you in the Q&A. But it's sort of related work, but different work of all of this work that you've been doing with refugees and how that's gone. And I know you do a lot of interfaith work, which just automatically happens when you're with a room full of refugees who've come to different places, like with the train, people from Eritrea, as you were talking about earlier, but also of actually going into situations for peace and reconciliation and starting to try and make the world a better place that people can go home. And I know that you've worked on that side of the coin as well.
I have, and I've had experience in Israel and Palestine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, South Africa, and particularly in Northern Ireland, because I was involved in a bomb blast in the big campaign of 92 and 93, where there were lots of bombs happening in London. And I was involved, I was in a bomb in London, which resulted in me losing hearing. And I wear a hearing aid in this ear, but I'm very deaf in this ear. And it was a pretty grisly business. I was very fortunate to just get away with hearing loss, but I mean, it was grisly. And I didn't talk about it for a long time until I was in a Centre for Peace and Reconciliation, St Ethelburga's Centre in London. And they happened to say it was a church which was consecrated and then it stopped being used. And they stopped using it and they stopped paying their insurance on the church. A week later, a huge bomb went off. The roof caved in. They had no insurance. They lost everything. If they'd have insured the building. So they were talking about this centre, which had become Peace and Reconciliation Centre, had lost its roof in a great bomb campaign. And I'd been invited to tell a story. But before I told it, I thought, well, I lost my hearing in the same campaign that this church was blown up. And so it just came out, and I said, this is what happened. And as soon as I'd finished, I was invited by two people, by Wilhelm Verwoerd, who is the grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd, who's the architect of apartheid in South Africa, and Alistair Little, who was a loyalist prisoner in Northern Ireland. And together they created something called the Sustainable Peace Pathway. I think it's not quite that. Sustainable Peace Movement. Because they both decided that they wanted to work against their past, against all the violence and the apartheid. And Wilhelm still has problems with his parents. I've met his parents in South Africa. They're all for apartheid. It was great. The country was great when we had apartheid. So they created this Sustainable Peace Trail. And I went to work with people in Northern Ireland, people who'd planted bombs. And there were people from the security services, from the army. Not a lot of British Army people did go to Northern Ireland because it was very difficult for them, because they felt so terrible about what they'd experienced, what they'd done, and how they'd be treated. So I worked with lots of people who'd had limbs blown off, people who planted bombs, people who'd shot people who'd got brothers and sisters who'd been shot. And we were confronted with each other. So I'd lost my hearing in a bomb. I had to work with somebody who planted bombs. And a very tough 3-year experience it was, going to Northern Ireland, doing projects in Scotland, going to Glencree in Dublin, doing stuff in London. So I had to tell him my story. And when I could tell he was in tears when I told him. I mean, so I lost my hearing in the bomb. I was injured, but for some strange reason, I went back into the where the bomb had gone off to see if I could help. And you do all sorts of mad things when you've been in a situation like that. You're not on the same level as everybody else. My story it moved him. He told me his story. I thought, my God, it made me cry, because if we'd have walked in each other's shoes, if I'd have walked in his shoes, as my friend, her name's Joe, her father died in the Westminster bomb, and she now works for Peace and Reconciliation. And the moment that Pat McGee came out of prison, who'd killed her father, for some strange reason, she decided to go and see him in prison, or coming out of prison. And she didn't know why she was doing it. She was terrible. She was nervous. For the last 30 years, they've been traveling the world for making peace. And there was on a radio program, and this awful radio woman from Daily Mail said, "Oh, well, all this forgiveness stuff, blah, blah, blah." And Joe said, "I never said I forgave him, but I work with him because we want to make a better world." But she said something that is so important. I think that if I'd have lived his life and walked in his shoes, I might well have done what he did. And he killed her father. And they go around telling stories. My name is Pat McGee, and I killed her father. So, I mean, you come across things like that. And it took me to South Africa to work in post-apartheid situations. I was already connected with the peace process in Israel and Palestine. And that's a tricky number. Because where do people in the combatants for peace, where do they meet with their Palestinian similar combatants? The Palestinians can't come into Israel, but Israelis, although they don't like doing it and they're told they shouldn't go into the West Bank, they're permitted to go into the West Bank. So this group has an organization in the Palestinian territories and in Israel, and they arrange meetings on checkpoints. Now, you have checkpoints between Israel and Palestine because people can't get in and out very easily, but Israelis go in because Israelis have settlements there. And the problem is, where you have an Israeli settlement, the settlement has to be protected, even though it's splitting up two parts of the village. So we met at this checkpoint because they needed a checkpoint, because there was an Israeli settlement there. Why, there was no reason for a checkpoint except for the Israeli people who were illegally there. So there was a checkpoint, not always manned, but patrol. So I went along with Janet Dowling, actually. We did a project together in Israel and Palestine. She's another storyteller many of you might know. And
also a counsellor, which I imagine was probably also a very good counsellor, which I imagine was part of what she was doing.
Yes, absolutely. She was. And I'm not a counsellor at all. But so there you are. You've got ex-Israeli soldiers. You've got Palestinians who've been, fighting. And it's quite awkward. They're very awkward. You get, we had one or two circles because there were one or two of us doing it. And you get so many Palestinians, so many Israelis, and they're sitting there awkward. So you've got a group of awkward people who don't know what to do. So what do? You play a game, sing a song, tell a joke. Tell us a tale, sing us your song, show us your bumper, out you go. And actually, you do. You get to the point of almost showing
bums,
because you've got to somehow get them. And they think, who is this?
Well, do you know what? Showing your bum is a universal language.
I know. But the thing is, you've got their attention. You've got to keep their attention.
To get their attention.
I mean, of course, I don't literally do that, but make a fool of yourself. But you also do it very willingly. And you find people there who you can see two people, and they're really, in any audience, you see people who are really feeding you. And so you do a little game, a little song, a little something that's funny, that's got a funny. And then Janet will come in and do a slightly little thing. And within 10 minutes, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, are there. What do? You've had your 10 minutes. But I've heard from people years later that I'll never forget that time you did this. It's 10 minutes. We were there for 10 minutes, and people have have remembered that. And hopefully that leads on to other things. I've been to Israel and Palestine many times since then, and worked not quite on the front line like that, but worked in Palestinian refugee camps, worked in Israeli libraries, and it's much easier in Palestine than it is in Israel, because so many people are inured to the fact that the situation is as it has become. And I mean, you might tell a story where there are two groups of people, and the Israelis will always say, that's us, isn't it? That's us. We're the aggressors, aren't we? Because they also are traumatized. They have, I mean, it's difficult for both sides, but one side is heavily armed and the other side isn't. So yeah, the piece work, you don't know how far you've gone, and you don't know. Sometimes they do want to hear a story, but sometimes it's eliciting a situation where people can talk to each other. They needn't be talking about what's happened to them. They needn't be talking about traditional stories, but they're telling each other about each other. And that's sort of humanizing and building a bridge. So I think of the peace and reconciliation area, you're just trying to build bridges, somehow. And often the time I think, oh God, I don't know how to do this, because it is a hit and miss. I mean, you could always pull something out of the bag to entertain them if they want to be entertained. But you do ask the deeper questions. How far is this going? I mean, I've come to places where people have come back to me and said, you made it worthwhile staying alive. That's in an asylum detention center. There's a lot of suicide, a lot of self-harm, because people are in a limbo. And many refugees who are seeking asylum, who are actually in here, so few of them now, they still don't know what their status will be, whether they'll be accepted. If they're unaccompanied asylum seekers, they don't know if when they're 18, they're going to be deported, or if their case will be heard. And all the time, story is the most important thing to them, because a refugee changes from coming from an oral storytelling tradition very often to having to have a factual story that will be told the same every single time. Because any deviation from the story that you told 5 years ago will be picked up and it'll be used against you. So stories are very much part of the refugee experience. How do I get them to believe me? And stories also are being created by our government to tell lies about the invasion of refugees, So story is everywhere in the refugee experience. And I'm trying to take it away from the direct confrontation with our own history and to find a separate place where you can place a lot of things where people can look at, the people who've suffered can look at the story of that suffering person, and they can empathize, and they might even decide to tell that story so that they can release something. So yeah, all that.
Thank you so much, Sef. So many.
I've rambled on.
No, but so many interesting and so many things to think about within that. And there's not been very many comments because I think everybody's just been concentrating and listening and just being there with you. But Wendy's saying that she was lucky enough to have heard Joe and Pat speaking about making peace with the enemy at Warwick University when they were touring together. She's never forgotten their powerful stories. And I've got one question from Simone here that I'm going to ask you, but anybody else, if you've got burning questions you really want to ask Sef before the end, now is the time to stick them into the Q&A to make sure that I get to them before we wrap up. And Simone is asking one of the questions that I really wanted to ask, is kind of, it must take such a toll on you to go into these places. You're there. I mean, that is what storytellers are really good at. That you were saying,
Yeah,
at holding space.
it does.
Whether you're telling, whether you're listening, storytellers are very good at creating a space where things can happen and holding that space for people. But then you need somebody to talk to afterwards. And Simone saying, you know, gosh, this is all so interesting and devastating. Thank you so much for all that you do. How do you deal with someone being taken from your sessions and treated so inhumanely? And
Oh,
she was sort of talking about that, you know, with the lad from Afghanistan who was dancing and he knew that he was going to go back. How do you deal with that?
exactly. It is terrible. It's hard. But what I often do, not always, but particularly in asylum detention, is work with somebody else. So I've worked with quite a few people. Gauri Raje, I worked with her for 3 years. And we both felt devastated many times. But without each other, we both said we couldn't do it. I mean, since then, I've done situations where I've had to deal with it myself. It's very difficult. But you do need somebody else. And with Gauri, she would tell me, we would tell each other. I mean, she came from Birmingham to Oxford at the time. I came from London to Oxford at the time. So we were going in two different directions, but we would find time. It was essential that we shared what had happened in those situations. Yeah, I mean, when I was on the Sustainable Peace Trail, we were actually facilitated along. I mean, of course, it doesn't happen now because it even dried up when we were part of the European Union because money was tight. That sort of thing needs to be paid for. So we did get that sort of supervision there, but very often a charity who is funding this sort of thing, they don't have enough money to fund the supervision or the coming down from it. Very interesting question and very pertinent.
So it is a new. I've lit my candles for a bit of hope going into the new year. I think anybody who is listening to this is already open-minded, is already interested in what you have to say, and is already sort of considering these issues. As we leave you, what is one thing? Have you got any advice of just like well, big things that we can do, but also simple things that might make a difference, things that we can take away from this and actually kind of, because we might all be feeling, I don't know what to do with what I've heard in this hour. How can I pass it on? What can I do?
Yeah.
What can we do?
It's interesting because just to come to my situation, and if I can talk about your situation, I've got a very diverse background. Language has been part of my life, and I speak a lot of languages, and I use a lot of languages, even though I might not speak them fluently. And it does help in my work, and it also helps in bridging in what I'm doing. But you were telling me the other day that all your work is about storytelling from this island, and that is really relevant and important. And I think that you can't do much harm if you get into the situation where there is a group of refugees and you hope and want to do something. And if you can find the organizers and they agree that you might just go in and do something, do it. Because that's what I did. I mean, I started not having to make it up. I really think that you learn, it's a school of hard knocks. You will make mistakes, but do it. I would recommend people to do it if they get the opportunity. It's not always easy to come by. So yeah, do it and learn through doing. If you're brave enough, because that makes me sound as though, I throw myself into situations. Not brave enough, but it is hard, as you pointed out, as Simone pointed out. But if you're working with a group of refugees, and very often children in schools are refugees, or the families of refugees. You go into a school. I mean, at the moment, I'm working in northwest London in a very Punjabi area. There's so many Afghan people there. They're refugees, and you're dealing with issues. Now, you don't have to talk about refugee things. You just have to be sensitive to I think one of the main things is ask people to uh, tell you a word, or what is it like? What sort of food do you like? You know, people will start sharing, and I think that's healing to people. And the story can come after that, but you can't just go in there, tell refugee stories and get away with it. Although somebody was here, Shane, the other day, he asked me, he's working with a group of Afghan young people, and could I help him? Well, the only help I could give him was do it and ask them how you say hello, ask them blah, blah, blah. And he came away and said it seemed to be that he'd had a great time. We always feel a bit tentative when we're first doing it, but it's worth doing it. And they're the ones who can help you in a way. The other thing, no, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that when we were talking the other day as well, you were saying is that most of your refugee work has been in this country because it takes time. It takes time to work with people. It takes time to build up trust. And in an ideal world, and a lot of this work is voluntary, would be to work with a group, an established group, that's once a month or once a week, and it's about building a relationship, and it's about coming back, and it's about, I think you can do things in a one-off way, but actually the best way is over a long period of time to get to know.
If you do the one-off way, essentially it has to be entertaining, it has to be fun. You can't deal with all the deeper issues on a one-off, but there's always a time in a one-off to give them a chance to ask you something, or and very often they'll ask you questions, personal questions, very intrigued.
Well, and it supports the leader who is there every week and every month. Yes, and it gives them a bit of breathing space, and it gives them a bit of input and something to work with as well. So
exactly.
It's always worth doing. Depending what your circumstances is, there are lots of charities where you can do all sorts of things. There's a fabulous charity where you can offer holidays to refugee families. Because I happen to live in quite a rural place, and I know people who've got a spare bedroom who will take in a family, or sort of a single mum and a child for a week each year and give them a holiday, just so they can get out of the city. And there are lots of charities, as you said, Seth, money is always tight.
It is.
If you can afford a couple of quid a month for a direct debit or an occasional fiver, it does all make a difference, doesn't it? So there are lots of little things you can do too.
There are. Everything's made up of little bits, isn't it?
And I think one of the biggest things is just smiling at people.
I can't do enough. It's always important to think I can't do enough, because then you don't do anything. So you're quite right.
And what we can all do is smile. We can all go out and just go, I haven't seen you before. Just make eye contact and smile.
You've said it. You really have. And actually, yeah, it's those smiles that people are looking for. The acknowledgement, the witnessing of who they are. Sometimes you don't want to directly say, oh, I know you're a refugee. I'm not a refugee. But the smile, and also even the smile, a soft and gentle smile makes a lot of difference.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's a refugee or not, because often you might not know.
Absolutely.
Generally.
And bus drivers, I always thank the bus drivers. And a lot of people in London, they look at me and think, that bus driver's done me a great deal. Bus driver's sitting there, locked in a cab all day, got 50 people on board, something might happen. He's in a very vulnerable position. People need bigging up every day. As you say, it doesn't have to be refugees. You're right.
Well, do you know what, though? I do that, though, and everybody knows that I'm obviously not from London. Because they go around making eye contact and smiling.
I know.
Bloomin' country lass coming in with her strange ways.
We need you in London. Come on, bear it.
Well, thank you so much, Seth. All the conversations that I have here, every one of them is completely different, and tonight has been so moving and so generous, and it's given me certainly an awful lot to think about, and it's just been a really wonderful conversation, and to get to know you more, because I know you as a storyteller, Seth, and these are the conversations that I want to have. And when we meet at festivals or at an event, these are the conversations that we don't have. You need to create a space, I think, to dig that little bit deeper and to have time to have this sort of conversation. And I really appreciate that we have finally had it. So thank you.
Well, I mean,
Very
just from
much.
my point, I appreciate what you're doing because, this is very specific, but I mean, you've been doing this fourth series now. I think it's very important. And not everybody can do that sort of thing. I don't know. I don't think I can do that sort of thing. But, to be doing that is so important to us as well. So thank you.
Well, I have to say, most of what I do is very selfish.
Well,
It's because
does altruism really work as altruism? We all need to feel we're doing something worthwhile. That's
yeah.
not selfish. We need that. We need that.
No, but these sessions really feed me, and so
Yeah.
thank you so much for your open-heartedness and your honesty and your generosity, Seth. And there's lots and lots of lovely messages coming in for you. So thank you all for coming and listening and for holding this space with us. It's just been fantastic. And so if you have enjoyed tonight, and I think everybody has, everybody's been, I don't know if enjoy is always the right word, but moved, inspired, thought-provoked, go and have a look at more of Seth's work. So he is at seftownsend.co.uk. You can follow him on Twitter, you can follow him on Instagram at Sef Townsend. And if you've enjoyed tonight, buy his amazing books. What's the third book that you're working on?
Oh, the third book is Wild London Tales for Children.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And if you want to catch up with any of the previous conversations, you can find them all on YouTube, Taking the Tradition On. Please do subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. And I will be back next month and the first Tuesday of every month. So next month on the 7th of February, Words in the Works continues, and I will be with Phil Aquady, and we will be taking on storytelling in education, which is going to be a big topic again to try and fit in an hour. But for this month and tonight, hurrah for Sef Townsend. Thank you all for your company.